Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am your host as always. Joining me today is a very special guest, a returning guest, friend of the show, Mr. Eric Smith. Eric, thanks for taking the time to join us, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I would appreciate hopping on to chat about the Chargers with you, and excited to kind of get into some offseason analysis.
Yeah, we're Senior Bowl next week, Combine a few weeks after that. So, we've got some downtime right now as content creators, and obviously you covering the team, but the train doesn't stop. We're, I think 90 days away from the draft is what I saw earlier. So or maybe 92 or whatever, 90-ish. So a lot of fun, a lot of the good stuff today to cover with Eric, and we're very appreciative of his time again. I kind of want to start with just kind of taking a vibe check. You guys who are our beat reporters have such obviously a great window of access that we as fans don't get. We, myself and Tyler, we have a different window because we were able to be at training camp and things like that, but we're not around the team every day. And you've gotten to know these players, these coaches. So, you've covered this team, you've covered the Vikings. In terms of the vibe after this particular playoff loss, is it different? Is it the same? Like, how would you describe how the players and coaches are kind of handling this playoff loss at the hands of the Houston Texans from a few weeks ago?
Yeah, it's now that we've had a few weeks to kind of digest it, I think overall it's a pretty positive vibe.
Hmm.
Like if you step back and look at it from like a 30,000 foot view, you look at all the good that happened in year one under Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz, and it's tough not to be excited about what did happen. Hopefully, obviously what the future holds. Hopefully there's good stuff coming there. But on a micro level, yeah, the playoff loss itself was pretty disappointing. Um, just because this team felt like it was on a roll at the end of the year, like they won 4 of 5. It felt like the offense was peaking at the right time. The defense had played well, obviously, all year. And it just felt like the table was set up to kind of make a run. And that obviously did not happen. And at least for me personally, I kind of felt it in the first half. Not to like rehash the entire game, but early on, when the Chargers get a field goal to open the game, they get the fumble on the first play, and they only get a field goal off of that. It's like, man, like it could or should be 14-0, and we're up 6-0. And I feel like we never just fully took advantage early on of kind of jumping on Houston, which we
Hmm.
had done in previous games, right? Like I think about the New England game, like we were up big 17-0. Like it just the like surge and the like momentum never really swung our way in terms of like taking advantage. Um,
Yeah.
and then we just allowed Houston to stay in it, and then you get a couple fluky plays. They're obviously a very good team too. And you look up at halftime and we're down, and it's like, man, it's you know, can we kind of turn it around and make a run? And things just kind of snowballed in the second half. So overall, the game itself was obviously disappointing. I think players and coaches, will tell you that they did tell us that. But when we talked to everyone the next day at locker cleanout, or when we talked to Joe and Jim, like there's definitely progress made, certainly in year one. Um, I think Jim Harbaugh called it a success, but not the ultimate success. I think that's a pretty fair way to put it.
Yeah, I know from our perspective, I certainly have not felt this way after a playoff loss since I was in like middle school during the LT days, right? Where, when the Chargers were losing those playoff games, you kind of felt like, oh, they're going to be back right in it next year. There's all this positivity, right? The 2013 team kind of felt like a fluke, and the 2018 team kind of felt like a team at the end of its rope. And I don't really want to rehash 2022. But this particular loss, it felt like, like you mentioned, not the ultimate success, but a successful season that should bring, positive changes for the future. And, all these people are doing, teams with the most, you know, they're the chances of sustaining success in the future. And a lot of them are bringing up the Chargers because of what Jim Harbaugh has brought to the table and Joe Hortiz. So it definitely feels different from a fan perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I mean, for me personally, I just wrapped up my third season covering the team. it feels different internally as well. And I think Derwin said that to us at locker cleanout. He's like, "This is the most optimistic I've ever been heading into an offseason." And that's someone who's obviously been around for a while, the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows. And Derwin is generally a pretty positive person, but for him to say that, it kind of
Yeah.
it spoke volume to me that he said that, and then other guys kind of echoed a similar sentiment as well. But now the challenge, right? It's like, okay, how do we take that step? Because I think we wrote something internally a couple weeks ago. The Chargers, I think it was like CBS Sports or something. They said Chargers have like the brightest future of teams
Hmm.
in the wild card round, but you're not going to like roll the ball out next year
Yeah.
until you win 11 more games. Like there's work to be done. With free agency and the draft and all that, and that's kind of where the fun is for us right now. And as the days go by, like we kind of get further and further away from the season. I think we've all kind of flipped the page a little bit, and we're looking forward.
Yeah, I would imagine that also includes, how Justin Herbert is feeling. But the medium has had kind of a heyday with Justin Herbert. There's all these guys who I think were kind of just waiting for that particular moment. I loved what Khalil Mack said afterwards about him, and on Locker Cleanout Day, that there's so much confidence in his ability to lead this team, and Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz kind of echoing that sentiment as well. How much, I guess, do you put into the way that people are talking and evaluating Justin Herbert now that there's, this playoff loss that is kind of going to hang over his head for a little while here, from at least for according to some media members and fans and things like that?
Yeah, it sort of is what it is. Like when you throw 4 interceptions in a game, you're obviously going to be criticized, and Justin acknowledged and said that after the game himself. Um, but I think it's pretty fair to say the Chargers wouldn't have won 11 games without him, or been in that spot, if he didn't play the way he did last season, if he didn't, gut out through like some pretty serious injuries where a lot of guys would miss 3 or 4 weeks. Um, I think after the ankle was healed up, I mean, it pretty much came out where Greg Roman and other people said like he was essentially playing at like 20%,
Mm.
and like that's stuff that would have kept other guys out for sure. Um, was the playoff game a poor performance? Of course, but I don't think you can pin it just on him. Like he's too good, and this is what I've learned about Justin. When things go really bad, and they don't often, like it was such a rare performance where it's almost a collective effort for it to go that bad. Um, whether that was him making a poor decision, you know, the offensive line, the receivers, it's just everyone is sort of involved in um, that poor performance. I have no shaken confidence at all about Justin Herbert. Like like I said, I've been fortunate to see him up close for 3 years now, um, and I think I wrote this on Wednesday. I had like 5 questions about the Chargers heading in the
Hmm.
offseason, and number one was like how he bounces back, and that's like you said, that's obviously going to be a storyline over the next 9-12 months until he has a chance to play in the playoffs again. But I mean, I wrote it then, and I say it now. Like I fully believe that he's going to get the Chargers back to the playoffs. Like he's talented enough. He's going to take the team on a deep run. Like I fully believe that. You know, it was just a bad game, and um, like I said at the top, it sort of is what it is.
Yeah, the way that he's talked about it's like he's been in the playoffs like every year of his career, and like every year he's had bad performances, and it's like there's 2 playoff games, and he played extremely well in the first half of one of those games, and not so great. Didn't have a ton of opportunities in the second half, and then yeah, it was not great this year. But um, you wrote this article, which was fantastic, and I shared it with everybody who was criticizing him this week about football Justin this year, and how kind of the team has wrap their arms around him from a leadership standpoint. And like we've always felt that he's a good leader, right? But this year, it really did feel like he took a very big step forward in that regard, at least publicly, because, maybe Jim Harbaugh put him up to more opportunities or things like that. But I think it was Rashawn who said that they would follow him to the gates of hell, and like they love their quarterback. And I just think that, we should echo your sentiments, right? That there is confidence in him that he can take that next step. And you brought up the ankle injury. There were 2 ankle injuries. There's a foot injury. So the fact that he did take them to where he did take them, I think should be praised, while also acknowledging, yeah, it wasn't a great playoff game, but Lamar Jackson's had poor playoff games. Josh Allen does, Joe Burrow does, Patrick Mahomes has had a couple poor playoff performances. So it's just kind of the nature of the beast. And, these playoff games really magnify the lenses of where your team struggles. And unfortunately for the Chargers, that led to a poor performance from Justin Herbert.
Yeah. I pretty much agree with everything you said there. And something Joe Hortiz brought up in his year-end press conference kind of struck a tone with me. He said, Peyton Manning, it took him, I think he was 0-3 until he finally won his first playoff game. Joe was obviously around Lamar, took him a couple times. Like, it's tough to win in the playoffs. Like, you don't just show up and win. I know there's a lot of like external chatter too about like, man, the Chargers want the 5 seeds so they can get an easier matchup in Houston. Like, that was never the belief, like, in the locker room. Like, the Texans are still a good team. Their front, obviously the defensive front is excellent. We saw that on display. So yeah, we'll see. Now we just kind of wait and hope they get back next year and try to get a different crack at it.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned flipping the page. We'll flip the page here. In your article about the biggest questions, obviously Khalil Mack is at the forefront of it. Adam Schefter tweeted out earlier this week that he is going to play in 2025. So we know that he's ready to rock. Do you think that this is Chargers only for him, or do you think that he is genuinely going to test free agency and that the Chargers might be looking at scenarios where they have to replace a guy who's had, I should have done the math before this, but 30 sacks as a member of the Chargers, and he's one of their best leaders. I'm not going to ask you to put a percentage on it, but do you think Khalil is back? Do you think the team lets him walk? Like, where are you at with Khalil at this point in time?
I think Khalil has 31 sacks in 3 years.
That was a good guess. I knew he had the 17 last year, so I had to round up a little bit.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not in a position to give like definitive statements on if I think he will be back. Like, I saw Schefter tweet, obviously, so that's Khalil's decision, and it came obviously pretty quick. Knowing Khalil like I do, I've gotten to know him decently well over the years. I think he still has a lot left in the tank, and I think he has a lot left like in his competitive fire. Because we wrote before the game with him, like he was not personally 0-4, but he had never won a playoff game. Mm-hmm. He had never been part of a playoff win. I think it's a better way to put it. And he wasn't again in Houston. So Khalil has been in 5 playoff games, hasn't been a part of a win yet. So I know that that is eating at him. To me personally, that's why I think he made such a quick decision. He wants to try to get another crack at it himself. In terms of where he's playing next year, I don't know. That's up to Khalil. That's up to the Chargers. Khalil, oddly enough, like is a free agent for the first time in his career, which I didn't realize. I thought he had been before, but he had just been traded. Mm-hmm. Traded twice to Chicago and then out here to LA. So Khalil can kind of do anything he wants. He's earned that for sure. Would the Chargers love to have him back? Of course. Like, not only for his on-field play, which I think personally was still really good last year, even if he turns, I think 34 next month. But he's such a great leader, and he's so like well respected in the locker room. People just like gravitate to him, even though he doesn't like say a lot. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows he's a future Hall of Famer. And he's like a magnet, in there of like leadership. So I don't know. I don't know if he's coming back here or not. That's his call. If he comes back and he's wearing, number 52 and powder blue next year, that's great for us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The fans are a little bit more split on that than I would have thought, but he played fewer snaps than usual, which I think was intentional from the Chargers to try and keep him fresh. But on a per play basis, he was still highly effective. And
Mhm.
Daniel Popper wrote a great feature ahead of the playoff game about Khalil and Joey's relationship, and there's been other nuggets from you guys on the beat about Khalil and Joe Alt like kind of taking a relationship together. And last year Quentin Johnson talked about Khalil going out of his way to make him comfortable, and then all the team dinners and things like that. So it's tough for me to imagine this regime and this coaching staff that talks and puts so much weight into a culture trying to replace Khalil Mack, right? Like it's so difficult to get a guy like him to build something up in a place. And so, you know, to me, it makes all the sense in the world for the Chargers to be aggressive there and bring him back. And if Khalil chooses to go elsewhere, I just hope that it's not Kansas City. Anywhere else, I would understand.
Yeah, yeah, I'd probably agree with that. And at locker cleanout day, Khalil did tell us, first of all, he said, I'm mulling retirement. And then we kind of asked, okay, like the options of would you want to come back here or go to another team? He said, yeah, I don't know that. But in terms of the Chargers, he did acknowledge the culture that is here. Obviously, he was like effusive and it's praise for Justin, and just loves playing for Jim. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how much that factors in. Obviously, money's going to play a part in it too.
Yeah.
With the salary cap and all that, and what other teams offer. If it comes back here before free agency, I don't know. That's always a possibility too. I don't know, but we'll find out in the next 7 weeks.
It's gonna get here in no time. How much, if at all, do you think Joey and Khalil's futures are like tied together potentially in 2025? Joey's obviously under contract, right? But
Yeah.
there's been a lot of talk about potentially moving on from him because of his cap number and the contract. If they decide to move on from Joey, do you think that hurts their chances of bringing Khalil back?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Khalil was thinking on that. I know last year they both agreed to restructure, and while they said it was, I made my decision and he made
Independent, yeah.
like we kind of put the pieces together throughout the season. They wanted one more chance to play together. Um, and I don't know if that's going to impact Khalil this year. If Joey's, like I said, he's under contract for next year. If that's going to sway Khalil one way or the other, um, I don't know. I mean, I think overall, um, over 3 years, like because Khalil was traded here a couple months before I got here, and the potential, right, of like having those two guys together
Yeah.
was something that everyone was just excited about, and it just never really reached the full potential. Injuries had something to do with that, obviously on Joey's side. But I don't know. I don't know if I can. I remember after the Texans game, they shared like a long embrace on the field, and I don't know what they said. Like Khalil said that's just like a private conversation, but um, I'm not sure if they're tied together or not. It's a business too.
Yeah.
Like your personal feelings play a part, but money and all that stuff kind of comes into play too. So and for Khalil, obviously, it wanting to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. The legacy is definitely something that I think is weighing probably heavily into at least Khalil's decision, probably Joey's as well. Um, in terms of outside free agency, everybody wants the Chargers to go be aggressive and find a new wide receiver to pair with Lad McConkey. There's a chance that the wide receiver free agent group is not very good if T. Higgins stays in Cincinnati. But for you, like if you had to pinpoint priorities from a position standpoint of where this Chargers team could look in free agency, where do you think, again, Jim Harbaugh is going to look at things very differently than fans and media, right? But where do you think that they are going to kind of build their free agency plan out of, if you will?
Yeah, I actually have the word. You and I are talking here on Friday. I have a story coming out on Monday that kind of looks at like an overall, like an overarching view of the offseason, and the draft and salary cap and free agency and all that. And at the bottom of it, I put positions of need based on free agency. That's not like what I think the team should do. It's just kind of what positions that they could target just based on the number of free agents that they have. And I put five on here. I'm looking at it right now. I put the offensive and defensive line. Um, and if we start like on the O line, obviously center is a hot topic of conversation because Bozeman's going to be a free agent. Um, but also Brendan Hymus is a free agent. He's was into like a backup center guard. And Sam Mustipher, the free agent, he got some time at right guard. So the interior of the line becomes a pretty good focus, where the free agency or the draft, like they're going to have to either bring guys back or add new people. And we obviously know how much Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz love the offensive line and want that to be like a strength of the team. On the flip side of that, too, the defensive line is a focus. And then again, this is just on who is scheduled to be a free agent. This is not like my personal pecking order here, but with Puna Ford, Morgan Fox, and T.R. Tart, those are three of the Chargers' four best defensive linemen this year. So, decisions are going to have to be made there too about, okay, who comes back, who goes, the draft, all that. Wide receiver is on the list too, simply just because I think the three receivers under contract next year are obviously Ladd, Q, and Dede.
Mm-hmm.
All the depth guys, and you can't have three receivers on the team. So like
Yeah.
you're going to have to add or bring guys back there too. Linebacker actually is on the list too, and no one's really talking about that because obviously of the season that Deion Henley had. But obviously Junior Colson's under contract with his rookie deal, but pretty much everyone else is a free agent. Troy Dye, Nick Neiman, Denzel Perryman, and Shaq Quarterman. So that group could be hit hard if they all don't come back. So it's like a low key priority, right? One that like not a lot of people are talking about. Because some of those guys are mostly like special team players.
Mm-hmm.
But that matters when you're trying to go to the playoffs and win in the playoffs. Outside linebacker is lumped in there too, just because of how big of a name that Khalil is.
Yeah.
And then obviously then you get into the secondary, right? Like you have your starting safeties are back, obviously with Derwin and Alohi, but pretty much everyone else is a free agent. Elijah Molden, Tony Jefferson, Marcus May, and then obviously at corner Christian Fulton and Zahn are free agent too. So 30, they have 30 free agents. It's a big number.
That's a big number.
And a lot of those guys, I don't know the exact number. I could look it up, but a lot of them were guys that were signed last year that are signed like a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
And a lot of them played well. So do they come back? Do they get a bigger deal? Joe Hortiz obviously has talked about the comp pick cycle, the formula with that, who stays, who goes, how does that formula kind of get going? Yeah, very interesting stuff. But those are probably the positions I have penciled just because of the sheer number of guys that are scheduled to be free agents.
Yeah. According to Over the Cap, they have 45 players on the roster. They're hopefully going to have 10 draft picks with the compensatory picks. Once those get finalized, they're hopefully going to get 3 of those. So that brings you to 55. And most teams kind of get, some 12 to 15 undrafted free agents, depending how many. But there's a lot of players that this team needs to sign and go after. And so I understand like why people want them to be aggressive, but that cap space goes quickly when you need as many players as they have. And I'm glad you brought up the linebacker room, right? Because I mean, Troy Dye was so important down the stretch of the season, and Denzel Perryman was so important to start the season, and Terry Tart extremely important down the stretch of the season, and he was fantastic in the playoff game. So they have so many depth pieces that they are either going to need to bring back or replace, and that cap space is going to be gone in a hurry. And fans are like, "Bring me T. Higgins, bring me Osa Odigizua," and I get it; they're great players, but can they actually afford to be that aggressive in free agency? I think is a legit question based off of how many players they have to, again, bring back or replace.
Yeah, I sort of asked Joe that a similar version of that question at the year-end press conference. I kind of framed it like, okay, a year ago you got here, the Chargers were obviously over the cap, had to make some moves just to get under, and now you have, I think it was updated the other day, it's like 60+ million in cap space.
Yeah.
How do you look at that? He's like, well, we're always going to be smart, you know, um, and that's not to say they won't try to go get some bigger contracts, but I wonder the word he used was reckless. He's like, we're never going to be reckless because eventually, if you do that, you have to pay up eventually down the road, right? If you don't hit on a big name guy, then that hurts your team. Um, but like, I wonder if they're going to take a more like measured approach with it instead of kind of like what you alluded to, like instead of going for like a big fish, maybe they go like medium
Several
fishing,
media pitches.
and they sort of like try to get a more like well-rounded roster.
Yeah.
That's just something I've thought about and what I wrote about in like in the 5-question story. And it's fascinating because this is going to be the first full off season of Jim, but also Joe. So we're going to get a pretty good glimpse here of how he wants to build a roster.
Yeah, fascinating to see. I mean, the 1-year contracts, for the most part, brought a lot of value to this team, but it feels like he can kind of go up, a couple shopping aisles, if you will, instead of, checking the for sale areas. He can go get some real ingredients here. One of those is potentially J.K. Dobbins. Had a fantastic season. He did get injured again. It was relatively a minor injury, although he said publicly it was like an grade 3 sprain, which usually is 6 to 8 weeks, and it held him out for 4. So very impressive there. But how do you think JK factors into their plans this offseason?
Yeah, that's going to be another interesting name to watch. I thought he was really good this year. He did miss a month with that knee injury, but um, he's been up for all the comeback player of the year awards. Like he didn't win today from PFWA, but he's a finalist at NFL Honors. He had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage for the first time in his career. Like to me, he was great. Like he was really good. I was really impressed with him, and he just like also like not that this matters a ton, but like he's just really like beloved in the locker room. Like guys just like rave about him, and he's just such a fun guy to talk to.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, like this is what we don't know, kind of what I just alluded to with like Joe and how he wants to build a roster. JK is obviously going to get a bigger deal than he got last year because he proved that he is back and he can run the ball and he's a great player. Is that going to be here where he's going to be the lead back, or does he go somewhere else and the Chargers likely get a comp pick for him next year? So I don't know. This time of year, like if you ask about certain free agents this time of year, every GM and coach will say, we've had those discussions with JK's agent, reps, and we love what he did, and we want to have him back. They say that about all 30 guys, right? But we're really going to know like March 12th. I guess technically the tampering period is like March 10th. That's sort of when we're going to have an idea. The combine is in late February, about a month away. So that's when stuff starts trickling out too. Right now, we just speculate, right? And that's not my area here because I work for the team. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's all the free agents are kind of up in the air, but I thought JK was really good this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. Well, last section here. You obviously have gotten to watch and get to know a lot of these coaches, and I love picking your brain about these. And I think one of your first couple article series was the get to know the coaches when you're first on the beat, and we love reading those. Jesse Minter, sorry,
it's coming back.
It's coming back. We love to see it. Love to see it.
We took last season off because one, it was just crazy, right? With the new coaches.
So many new coaches too.
But we also wanted to give them time to get acclimated and all that. So yeah, that's already in the work. We're going to do a conversation with all, I don't know if it's going to be everyone because there's 35 guys now, it feels like. But the majority of those guys, this offseason content will be conversation with all the position coaches, not the coordinators because they talk a lot during the season, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's coming back.
Well, there we go. You love to hear it. Good little tease for the off-season articles. I, I do want to ask you about Jesse Minter because he was not a finalist for Assistant Coach of the Year, which I think is crazy. He did not receive at least any public interest in head coaching openings. He could have certainly, disclosed to teams privately that he was not interested. But from being around Jesse, did anything surprise you about him, like in terms of his immediate success? Because I think we were very optimistic about him, but to have the number one scoring defense and be top 8 in EPA per play right away, like if you really look back at it, it's kind of crazy that he did what he did in year one. For you to be around him, are you surprised? And what, you have any like cool Jesse Minter stories that people don't really know about yet?
No, not like really cool internal stuff. Like him and I would chat here and there, like in the cafeteria sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, but honestly, it was just like mostly about our kids, because he's got a couple kids. My two daughters are much younger than his kids. Um, but we would talk about our kids, like pretty much. I don't know if it was every press conference, but he'd do his press conference and then I don't know if it was just like the time of day or whatever, but like he'd leave the press conference room and his kids would always be waiting, would not always, but sometimes be waiting for him like by the
Hmm.
staircase behind the room. So like we'd go to leave and like he'd be out there like playing with his kids. To me, that's like awesome stuff
Yeah.
as a dad myself. Um Football wise, like he just is a great coach. Players love playing for him. Like the way that the way that Jim Harbaugh talks about Derwin James, right, is the way that Derwin James talks about Jesse Minter.
Love
Uh,
that.
Derwin just like raves about him, and I think it was like midway, halfway or 2/3 of the way through the year. Sometimes like when we get open locker room, like for the most part, it's just mostly the beat, but every once in a while you get a new like TV person or someone from the outside will come in and they'll join a scrum and they're like, well, Derwin, like, how come you guys are playing so good on defense? And Derwin be like, we got Jesse Minter, you know. Um, yeah, he's just a fantastic coach. The thing that the moment that stands out to me from him this year, I forget what week it was, like midway through the year, where someone asked him about like his teaching style, and he said he's just learned over the years where like the players don't need to know everything that Jesse knows in his head. He's like, just break it down in like a simple way and don't like over teach it or like overstimulate them with every single rule you have for your defense because every player doesn't need to know all those rules.
Yeah.
Right? Give them the rules they need to know and they'll be they'll process it faster, right? They won't be thinking out there as much, and we saw that. Um, the communication between that unit, which is great. I don't know if you could tell on like the TV copy or you have to go back and watch the games before every play. Almost like all 11 guys are signaling or doing something, right? Like they're all just communicating. Um, and I noticed that like in camp, and it just carried. I noticed that in Houston
Mhm.
in the finale. So he's just a really good teacher. He's a nice guy. Like he's just a good guy. But yeah, I think we're all pretty happy that he's staying here.
Yes, definitely so. But I remember going back and watching the all 22 of Tarheeb Still's first start against the Chiefs, and nothing changed, right? Like usually when you put in a rookie player, coming in for a veteran starter, like the defense kind of becomes a little bit more simple. Maybe they're not as diverse, but you know, Tarheeb obviously deserves a lot of credit for rising to that moment. But the communication just stayed the same, right? Like Derwin and Elijah Molden and everybody, it was Elijah was right into it, or not Elijah, excuse me, Tarheeb was right into it, and it
Mhm.
just carried throughout the entire season. And Marcus May, I mean, they had like 10 safeties play significant snaps for them,
So,
and that communication, like that's not just only about the players. Like the coaches obviously have to do a lot with the way that things are communicated. And, you could kind of tell early that this group just was coached differently as opposed to years previously. And obviously Jesse Minter has that unique lens of being kind of a guy who plans for the secondary first and foremost. It's where his bread is buttered, right? But even up front, you could always see Thule and Bud Dupree would communicate back and forth a lot, and Tier would jump in there, and it just was always such a treat to see on the All 22 how this defense was communicating each week.
Yeah, that's sort of what I said. Like something I noticed in camp, because during camp, you're there sometimes, like you're like 10 yards away from the field, and you can hear them, you can see them. So we kind of knew early on, like they were a pretty like connected group, and yeah, that's just carried over all year.
Yes, very excited to see the encore there from Jesse Minter and company. Well, all right, that's gonna do it for us. Really appreciate your time today, Eric. You've mentioned a few things you have coming down the road on Chargers.com, but any other stories you want to hint at or tease, or where can people kind of find your work and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I was going to mention it early on, but today is actually the 1-year anniversary of hiring Jim Harbaugh. We got to talk about that real quick.
It is.
Yeah.
Things have definitely changed quite a lot in the Chargers franchise since that point.
Yeah, it was it's been a crazy year, but it's been a good year, kind of like what we started the show with. It just feels like the team is like moving in the right direction, and again, there's work to be done with free agency and the draft, but having Jim and Justin and Joe, as like the cornerstone, like if you can nail the head coach and quarterback, obviously that's at the top of the list. You get a great GM to go with it, that's even better. It feels like the Chargers have all three. But yeah, you just kind of think back to 1 year ago, and we got the news and we were fired up. I was actually on paternity leave. I wasn't even in the building at that point. My daughter was like, let's see, what day is it? She was like a week old at that point. I was like in the middle of all that, but
you're probably barely checking your phone, and then you come back, here, surprise.
Yeah. I mean, we were hopeful, right? That the Jim was going to be the guy, and we had stuff, pre-written, like ready to go. But yeah, that's what I did like the entire time before paternity leave, was just writing about Jim Harbaugh and like other potential candidates, so that because I knew I was going to be out. But yeah, it's awesome. Like Jim is great. He's good to us, internally. He's 1,000% like one hell of a football coach. And yeah, just excited to see what year 2 brings.
Yeah, it feels good to know that there's like actual continuity in place. Like in previous seasons that Justin Herbert has been a part of, it's always like, well, you have like 2 head coach firings, offensive coordinator firings, all that stuff. So this feels like the first time where really everything is kind of settled from a coaching standpoint, from a front office standpoint. And and Jim talked about them not putting Justin in good enough situations for the playoff game, and I expect that to change, man. Like I think they've earned so much grace and positive vibes from the fan base that until we see otherwise, like we should expect to see Justin and the team and everybody take very meaningful improvements into year 2.
Yeah, version 2.0. That's what Jim and Joe called it. And we won't see that really until September, I guess. But like I said, the work starts now, and excited to see what happens.
Yeah, so are we. Chargers fans, definitely check out Eric on Twitter. Obviously, I'm sure most of you guys read his stuff on the website every once in a while, but there's so many great stories that come out each and every week from Eric and Omar. You guys do a wonderful job over there at Chargers.com, and we're really appreciative of your time today, Eric, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Of course.